Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Garret Schellenhammer.
And what movie are we going to overanalyze this week?
The Escape Room. Directed
by Adam Robitel and written by Breji Shute, if I have that, probably am butchering that pronunciation, and Maria Melnick. The film follows a group of people who are sent to navigate a series of escape rooms, only to find the consequences are deadly. Starring Logan Miller, Deborah Ann Woll, Taylor Russell, Tyler Labine, Jay Ellis, and Nick Dodani. Mostly unknown. Some of them are have been on a few things here and there. You might recognize them.
Yeah, I think the female antagonist was the only real, the military girl was the only one I noticed. From just passing things, not.
Yeah, she was on True Blood, and she's on Daredevil now, the vet.
Oh, yeah. See?
So, I recognized her from that. Okay, what did you think of the movie?
Honestly, I was shocked and surprised at this movie. I think I have 3 reasons I was shocked and surprised. 1, it was not what I was expecting from the trailers whatsoever.
Okay.
And then 2, it shocked me, and we'll get into some of the nittier details later about, I did not expect as much mental health to pop up in this movie as it did. And, everybody's like, oh my God, nothing about mental health. But no, this is actually really important today. We'll talk about PTSD and how that pops up. And then the third thing that kind of shocked me was, I was kind of thrown for a couple twists. I mean, the expected twists were there, but the unexpected ones I was really enjoyed. So I was kind of shocked by this movie.
Okay. I was mildly interested. I wanted to see how it was going to come out, and I was interested in the clues, but I was just very put off by sort of the movie making aspect of it.
I wouldn't see this movie in theaters, by the way, if I'm recommending this to people right now. And I think that goes to my first point of I was just kind of shocked that I was expecting from this movie to be more of a fun, exciting, kind of thriller, not a gothic horror type of thriller that has this underlying plot about death and,
survivorship.
Morality.
Yeah. I found it's a horror movie, and so much of really making a good horror movie is editing. You know what I mean? You've got to be able to ratchet up the tension. You've got to be able to time your cuts. And they filmed it like it was any other movie, not like it was a suspense or a horror movie. I just found editing was poor.
Yeah. It gets your heart rates up in a couple places, but throughout most of the movie, it was kind of all right, I've seen this, I've seen that. Okay,
yeah.
Literally I'm in the same place for 5 minutes and not had a change of scenery or change of the camera panel or anything like that. And I'm just move a little to the left. Show me more of the room. Show me more of somebody's face. So you get a lot of side faces in this movie. I don't know if you noticed, but you see a lot of the side of people's faces. And that's one of the things I think in cinematography and editing that I just hate. You have the ability to literally capture multiple angles of somebody from cameras and mesh them together. But you just see a lot of side of somebody's face. And so I was kind of halfway through the movie, I was I'm not seeing their emotion. You're literally trying to point people's faces at another item is what they were trying to do.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. For all of the things that make for good movie tension, camera angles can really do a lot. And, subverting an angle, just holding the camera and shooting the scene, if you come at it from a weird angle or tilt the camera or do different things like that or pan it in interesting ways, again, really does a lot. And this movie just really didn't have a lot of that going on.
Right.
Plus, as much as I have complained about the score being used to too much effect in other movies, this one I'm the score did nothing. It wasn't a very good, tension.
I didn't know there was actually music.
Yeah.
Other than, the songs playing on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I was come on. You need some score. You need to, keep that tension.
And it
mounting.
wasn't, ambient, lack of noise on purpose either.
Right.
It
not an effective use of silence versus...
I think we talked about this in Annihilation before, the effective use of ambient white noise was actually intent to make you feel like you were in, an airlock chamber. But... this movie had no, I don't know. I felt, like I said, I would not see this movie in theaters. I was shocked because I was expecting more from this movie, and I didn't get that. But I was also shocked that, like, there wasn't much there.
Yeah,
there wasn't a lot of acting at all. It was, like, dramatization is more what I can say. It wasn't acting. It was more just like, this is a character who I'm portraying, and you could tell.
Right, and I was trying to figure out, so you have, like, these 5 characters, and, you know, what is the movie's message about who these people are and why they're all trapped together, and we can kind of get into that later, but yeah, there wasn't a lot of, you know, it just didn't really hang together, and the acting was fine. I mean, the people did fine. I'm not saying... But I agree, they didn't have a whole lot of depth or range to show.
Right, and I don't know, like, that's why I think it's a dramatization, because to me, acting is like a character you have to step into. I don't know that there was enough in the script for them to develop a character. There was just not a lot of actual talking about themselves other than talking about what they were doing. And so I was kind of just, like, left with it, because the whole premise of the movie is for them to be these specially picked people to go into these rooms. And so I'm expecting all this backstory, and I see terrible cutback flash scenes.
Yeah.
But I don't ever, like...
And the red-shirted guy is so the red-shirted guy.
Yeah, like...
The person who dies first is so obviously going to be the person who dies first. Like, it's just, like, they don't even give him, like, an intro setup into the room. So you're like, right. Well, he is obviously a disposable character. Like, no suspense there.
So it just was, like, that's what I would, like... It almost, like, if I had listened to this on a radio, like, a radio set, like, this had been, like... played like an Edgar Allan Poe record or something where I was listening to this, I think it would have been more suspenseful than had I watched it.
I agree. Although, having said that, the actual, like, escape rooms themselves were very cool. Like, I think...
Best part about the movie was
if
the set design.
Yeah, if the art direction hadn't been there, then I literally would have been like, why am I even sitting here? But it actually was cool. And the whole, like, upside-down pool room, billiards room, like, I thought that looked awesome. Like...
I appreciated the minimalism of the rooms that use CGI on the outside. Mm-hmm. So basically, here we go, spoilers. Not like you're not listening for spoilers anyway, but there are 5 rooms. Mm-hmm. And the first is an oven. The second is a giant freezer. The third is an upside down room. The fourth is a hospital room. The fifth is a... psychedelic art, 19 warped, whatever. And the last one is a library. And those rooms were great. Like, literally stunning. The best part was seeing the rooms. The details that they put into the room, making the rooms look rough and the best quality they could at the same time is something. I thought the set design and art direction was phenomenal. But the minimal use of CGI. You know, we know that the oven fire was CGI. But the actual room itself was actually built really well. And then you go into the cabin freezer, and the only thing that was CGI was, like, the outside walls was mimicking snow. So I felt like the CGI was there. I didn't care about it, but the set itself was what I cared about.
Yeah, no, totally. And, you know, I'm as much practical effects as you can throw into something, the better. Yeah. So I highly enjoyed that aspect of it. So, there's not much more I can say about this as, like...
There wasn't... And we knew, I think both of us knew going into this, it wasn't going to be our top-rated film we'd ever done. But I didn't expect it to be as much Saw-esque.
Okay.
And that kind of gets to my second point. Like, I was expecting it to be a thriller where they were trapped in these escape rooms that were real life, but I didn't expect the underplot of, like, there's a organized group of rich people wanting to watch people die for money. I was like, we did this. This is... Battle Royale. This is Cabin in the Woods. Yeah. This is, like, I mean, we've been here, we've done this. Is Hunger Games. Like, we've literally beaten that horse to death. And I was just kind of like, oh, you could have literally just made it, like... I didn't want it to be Saw, one individual doing this for, like, purposes he was trying to, like, punish people. But I also didn't want it to be this crime syndicate of rich people, like, betting on people's lives of who's going to win or die based on nothing they know about them.
Right. I mean, I remember, I think, I was like, my mother once said something about, like, the thing that makes Stephen King so scary is, like, all of the people who are scary in Stephen King are, like, there's a real reason they are the way that they are. Like, the psychology of the villain, as it were, is really on point. And so then that makes it freaking terrifying because you get why they are doing evil things versus, like, when you have a character who's like, oh, they're just crazy to be crazy. Like, it's easy to sort of distance yourself from the story and be like, that couldn't happen to me. But
we never even got to see a face. Like, it was over the top for me at the very end of the movie where they're like, it's a blackout silhouette on a screen, like, voice changer, like, the crime is going to happen later. And I'm like, no. And the ending, like, if you can literally, after they get out of the room, just walk out of the theater, you'll see a better movie than the end scene.
Oh, yeah, please don't stay. Yeah, let's tackle that for a second. Because it was like, so then they, like, book a flight, and I'm like, really? You'd get on an airplane? Like, that just, everything about that was like, this is so dumb. And then they, like, show you that they're gonna, like, kill them on this airplane, and you're like, yeah, I kind of figured that. Like, yeah, like, what was the point of this?
Basically, they can't accept that and I'm literally like, this what's upsetting to me. If you were to take Hunger Games and Cabin in the Woods and mix that together,
and Untouchable,
yeah, you're there. This is that
you've
movie.
got it. Like,
there are 2 winners in the end instead of 1.
Yeah.
It is literally a monster is unleashed, and the escape rooms are all built based on what they need to escape versus their own personal fear. Like, and then it's all just like this mass cover-up conspiracy bull. And I'm just like, it didn't do it for me. And I was just kind of like sitting there at the end. I was like, without all this explanation, I actually would have loved the cliffhanger. Like, they didn't know. Oh,
absolutely.
They didn't know who it was. They didn't know anything about it. Just like them watching the screens being like, good game or something like that. And that would have been the end of the movie. And I would have been like, mind blown. Who is this? What's their angle? And then never get a follow-up movie. I love stuff like that. I don't always need 8 Saw movies to tell me what his plan is. I don't need 4 Hunger Games to be like, oh my God, we're back in the arena again.
Well, and I see this a lot. I mean, this is oftentimes where, like, horror goes off the rails is when they start to explain things and you're like, no, don't explain it. Like, once you start to explain it, it sounds really stupid. Like, and then I can find plot holes and stuff. Like, often the best like suspense or horror is when it's unexplained and you're like, you're in the world is the world, and like, we're not going to tell you. Like,
yeah, if she would have walked out to like not even a computer screen, just an empty room, like, that was it. The game was over. No explanation whatsoever. And then she went and got the police and everything was gone when she came back. It would have been like, was she imagining this? Did it actually happen? Like, something psychologically, something that could have, like, just a good old twist that was not, oh my God, there's a conspiracy theory about rich people wanting to watch poor people kill themselves. Like, it didn't do it for me in the end. So if you can avoid the end scene, like, after they get out of the room and there's this last final battle with the game maker literally taking from the Hunger Games, calling them the game maker.
Yeah.
It just kind of was like,
yeah. So I was, like, thinking about, like, what is this movie trying to say? So here's what my old eyes saw. So you have, like, in this escape room, there's 2 sort of Gen Xers, there's 2 millennials, and there's 2 whatever Gen Z, like, whatever the next generation is, right? So the Gen Zs survive. The Gen X's one is like like a complete a-hole banker, and the other is someone who keeps getting left behind by technology. He's like a former miner, and now he's a trucker, and he's worried that, like, planned obsolescence on truck drivers as well, because there'll be self-driving cars. And then the millennials are like, you know, this noble vet who sacrifices herself. Or, like, the hopeless nerd from Big Bang Theory who thinks, like, his day is gonna go. It's like, his day is finally here.
Right.
And I'm like, with all the, like, archetypes you pick for your generation, like, I'm not sure these are it.
No, and that's I thought the characters were picked for a reason. I did not appreciate typecast characters and personality types.
Well, they tried to subvert it. I'll give them credit for that. They pick a black actor to play the, you know, asshole finance guy. They pick a woman to play the Iraqi vet. Like, they do try to subvert some of those things.
Yes and no. I thought some...
Picking an Indian guy to play the hopeless nerd maybe was not your best
like
casting choice.
There was some definite, like, stereotype casting, and, like, someone who is quiet and shy being, like, the super intelligent person, and somebody who was, like, you know, outgoing in an Iraqi war, whether male or woman, was still, like, having PTSD symptoms. Like, you know, like, it was just all, like, very... They didn't stretch the box. They pushed it. They did not stretch it.
No, totally. And they weren't really three-dimensional, like you said.
Right.
Like, they were archetype. I don't know. Like, they were just...
I literally think some of the characters had maybe 1,000 words the whole movie. And that would be a lot for some of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like... Because there's a lot of doing, which is an escape room. So, like, you know, but there's a lot of shouting, do this, do that. There's not a lot of, like, oh, hey, here's what really happened in my life. But I was super impressed with women's presence in this movie. Mm-hmm. That was where I felt like we really stretched it. We picked 2 women to really be the saviors of the movie. And that's not something we see very much, especially in horror films. We see damaged, destructive women make it through and struggle through. We never see, like, a strong woman actually come through. And in this... we see 2 strong women do 2 amazing things. We see, you know, the Iraqi war vet sacrifices herself to be able to make everybody else live. Mm-hmm. And that's something you don't see a whole lot. We see a lot of chivalry. I'm putting that in quotes. You can't see me, but quotes of chivalry, like men dying for women and everything. But she literally was like, I'm out for you guys. And then we see the super intelligent woman, this kind of hidden figures message in there. Like, I'm super smart. There's got to be another way to do this problem. Let me figure it out. Give me some time. Stop saying I'm dumb. Like, it was literally, I love she was like, stop telling me I'm wrong. I know what I'm doing. Just help me. And all the men were like, oh, no, do it our way. We have to play, blah, blah, blah.
Well, and I totally thought, like, it was very, to keep for some unknown reason tying this back to Star Trek. But that's what, like, why I got grounded in it is because she's, like, the only way to win is not to play. Like, It's just changed the rules and, like, the famous, like, Captain Kirk was the only one who ever, like, won the Kobayashi Maru because he changed the rules during the game. And I thought, yeah, like, that's sort of like, I'm such a maverick, I'm totally a rebel, I'm gonna break the rules or do something different, like, is almost inevitably, like, a very male character. So I agree with you there. Yeah, I thought that too. Like, having her be super, like, rebellious and, like, be like, I'm not gonna play your game, usually is a man.
Right, and, I thought those were the 2 best pushing of, like, stereotypes and gender reverse and everything, which I think hopefully we'll see more of in future movies. But I thought it was really great to see 2 strong female characters and 1 typical aggressive male character, 1 older male character, 1 nerdy male character, and then I'm not really sure how you would just...
slacker males?
Like, describe... I mean, other than, like, drug addict, but he wasn't a drug addict in this movie. He was addicted to alcohol. But...
I mean, to me, he was, like, again, you're sort of stereotypical, like, slacker character. You're, like, Spicoli's or Clerks of the world, the, like...
But we had no backstory from him. Like, we know that he killed his friends in a car crash, but we don't know, like...
so bad he can't even level up from stock boy to grocery.
Right, he can't interact with people? Like, what's so wrong with this kid? He can't talk to people. Like, we missed all that.
Yeah. Again, like, the youngest generation who end up being the winners, like, it's not clear to me, like, why they are the winners, like, why them and not, like I said, they had some pretty negative things to say about Gen X. Like, they were like, you guys are worthless. Either you've been totally left behind or you're, like, agents of evil. And I was like, okay, try not to take this too personally.
Well, it's just kind of, and I guess we're going to keep coming back to it, and I just wanted to hit home with you guys who have not seen the movie. There was just not enough depth of a character for me to really understand what they were thinking and what they were doing. So I didn't even feel like I could play the game with them because I have no idea what's going through their head.
That is a really good point, yeah.
I couldn't put myself in any of those escape rooms, which were not consistent scientifically across the escape rooms, but that's a whole different podcast I could do for my own about escape rooms in general.
I've never been to one.
There are some escape rooms that are like, in the movie, there are some that you could all escape and you could all get out of. There are other ones that it was meant to kill. It was literally meant for one person to move on to the final stage.
Right.
So they wanted you to pick one person off every time. But it didn't make much sense until you get to the second to last room, which, as we appear to know, there could have been more. They get poisoned, they have to find an antidote, is the short and sweet of that. But there could have been more antidotes. We don't know, but they only found one to start with. And then they're hallucinating, so they're fighting and blah, 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 and so then people die. But it seemed like some of the other rooms were meant for them all to work together so they could get out. But then I saw this with some friends, and they brought up some good things. There wasn't enough water, even if she had not drank from it, to get out of the first room. So somebody would have held it down, which that's not how science works, because you could put any heavy object on top of a cylindrical object.
That's what I was thinking. Like, I was like, just use a weight of some sort.
The second room, and somebody brought up a good point, if one person had stayed in the cottage, they would have won, because they would have been locked in and survived. So, like, it goes to the next point of kind of like, we're so used to rushing into problems without solving them. We want to tackle a problem head on, which is sometimes a great way to do it. But this is a metaphor, so stay with me. Most of the problems we encounter need to be looked at, taken to what's into account of what we have and what we don't have, what we need, and then solved. Because most of the problems they got themselves into was countdowns, because they rushed into something without even thinking about the process. Every room, if they had just only, the first room is an oven, they turned on the oven dial immediately. Well, you didn't look around the rest of the room and, like, try anything else. You literally was like, oh, this must be the first answer. And so I want to, like, get at the point. I think our current state of the world is the quickest way to solve a problem is by brute force. And that's not the quickest way to solve a problem. The quickest way to solve a problem is by taking in your surroundings, taking the time to process what's there, and then determining the best course of action. It takes more time, and we don't like that instant gratification. I think we talked about this in The Incredibles. We love that instant gratification. We love that just now culture. And I think that's where I get into my last and final point. This was the best metaphor for PTSD I have seen in a long time.
Before you go down that road, I just want to respond to what you just said, which I think is really interesting, and having sort of the strong female role models. Because, like, one of the things that, like, when they do these, which I do not love, studies of, like, the difference between men and women, it's like men solve problems faster because they get to a solution, they like it, and they just enact it, whereas women start to plan out we have a tendency to survey the whole landscape, think of all the potential solutions, and then weigh the pros and cons of each. So it's like we have a slower decision-making process because we just have a wider net of all the things that we've considered. Now,
it may be slower, but more comprehensive.
And so kind of, I think when you talk about, again, and I don't want to go into like a whole genders, these kinds of things are not innate. And I think that you're right. Like, and I think that one of the things that as we've sort of evolved over time and we've gained more social consciousness and more thinking is like this sort of brute force, like this quote unquote masculine way of problem solving of like, well, I thought of a solution, so let's just do that one. It's like, hey, no, can we take a step back and think of the context and the possible consequences as something that, is really valuable. And we're not quite there yet. We still sort of reward the person who makes the decision the fastest. But I think...
But we saw that, and this is what's so amazing about how women took control of this movie, and that this is what I really want you to take away from this movie. Two things. The PTSD thing we'll get to in a minute. But, like, women literally owned this movie. They were the ones who solved every room. Literally.
Yeah.
Both women were the ones who solved the room, found the puzzles, did everything together. They were the ones who acted on everything. They were the only ones who literally... found everything together and did it. Except for the very last room, which technically is debated whether he actually solved the last room or not, the library he was in, or if the door actually just busted open.
Oh, I didn't think he solved it.
I didn't either. So he
My conclusion
cheated.
Was like he was the last one left and that's how he got out.
Yeah.
Because it should have, if he had solved
Correct.
it, the door would have opened.
Yeah. But there's a lot of examples of how men were like brute force or wanting to invert the rules were punished.
And became competitive.
Right.
Right, where the women, like, again, very stereotype of, like, gender rules is, like, the women are look to collaborate and say, okay, how does everybody do their part and how do we get everybody out through? And whereas the one guy was like, it's me and then everybody else. And it's like, no, we all accomplish more if we work together. And that message.
The Iraqi war vet starts climbing literally through this is a room that's upside down, which was a really cool, I hope it's an actual, it didn't look CGI to me. It looked like they had actually built the room upside down, which was amazing. Like a good set design deserves. Amazing. And then it was the one who just figured out there was a puzzle. The men have literally done nothing in that room other than complain.
Oh, yeah.
And,
they whine a lot.
Yeah, and then we get to the next room after the Iraqi war vet sacrifices herself. And we get to the next room. And that's when the women were like, I'm done playing by their rules. I don't want to play anymore. I want to, get out. And the men are like, no, you have to play by the rules. You have to do it this way. This is what the men say to do. You need to do it. And then they literally just abandon her because she won't play their game. And they end up killing one of their own in the process, trying to play their game. And I'm just like, everything in the room was triggered by doing something. So if they had looked around, not touched anything, and processed what was in the room, they could have solved a lot of the problems without actually having to engage anything yet. Right. And they could have gotten out of most of the rooms. I mean, there is obviously better ways to get out of all of these rooms. Again, that's a whole nother podcast in escape rooms. But this idea of that we rush into so many things these days without seeing the consequences, without looking at the information around us. We just rush in blindly, do, and we don't take time to be like, how do we stop and calm down and really process what's going on? Which leads me into PTSD. This is one of the best movies I've seen tackle PTSD in a long time. There are 4 instances of PTSD panic attacks in this movie, and something that can be very tangibly felt, because that was the only time I thought the flashback and cutscenes did really well, but it was really choppy. I mean, just it wasn't good cinematography.
Yeah, it wasn't artful, I guess.
Yeah, but it was very choppy, so it kind of jolted you itself. But you see 4 people have PTSD attacks. And the whole premise of this movie is they are all survivors. And I think that's important when we get to talking about PTSD. They all have survived something, because a PTSD person is post-traumatic stress disorder, a person who has survived some traumatic event. It does not have to be the same as your traumatic event or my traumatic event or her traumatic event or their traumatic event. It is a traumatic event. And so this movie literally made you feel that, but it made you realize then too how to stop, process. This isn't real. How can I get through the stress that's going on right now that I'm experiencing internally? And you saw that over 4 different characters. We didn't get to see it with every character because, again, the depth of character. And I say we experienced their trauma more than 10 seconds in the whole movie. But you saw, for the first time, really tackling PTSD that wasn't in a war film.
Yeah, and one of the bones I had to pick with the movie is that they sort of set up the idea that they're each the sort of sole survivor of their event. But the contrast actually didn't make a lot of sense. In one of the cases, the guy, is driving and drunk and gets in a car accident and kills all his friends, which is a totally different thing than you had no fault. There was nothing you could have done to prevent the plane crash that you were the only survivor of, too. And I was like, they're weirdly equating survivor's guilt with actual, guilt. Guilt of, no, you drove drunk, you killed your friends. There's no, or the one guy who, okay, he didn't cause the boat accident, but he, literally kills his friend because he's it's him or me.
Right.
And I thought that was a really weird way to, confuse PTSD and survivor's guilt with some other things that are just not about that at all.
And I want to make a distinction too. Survivor's guilt and PTSD are separate, but I also had a problem with that because it's there is actual survivor's guilt, feeling like you shouldn't have survived when somebody else did. PTSD happens reliving the traumatic event that you survived. There are 2 people who have, I think everybody in the movie has PTSD. I think that is a character need in the whole movie. I don't know that everyone has survivor's guilt, and I think you're right. They preyed on everyone needing to have survivor's guilt for surviving when literally 2 people, one committed murder. Right. And the second, and he says it was a him or I kind of scenario, but It doesn't feel that way in the movie.
You couldn't have put, like, your one arm in the jacket. So they're fighting over, like, there's only one winter coat after a shipwreck. I'm like, so, like, huddle up, everybody.
Yeah.
You put one arm in the jacket. You put the other arm. Like, we do a 2-person in one jacket. It actually isn't that complicated. Like,
or just sitting together, cuddling for warmth.
Sure. Yeah, it's like, everybody spoons. Like,
But they mixed, I think, that idea of, like, and you're right, the guy who literally chose to drive drunk with his friends in the car and ended up crashing and killing them all. Like, that's, I'm going to piss some people off. I don't believe that's survivor's guilt. That is, to me,
no, it's just actual guilt.
Feeling guilty for killing your friends, which is a whole thing in itself, which you need to process. Don't get me wrong, but survivor's guilt is feeling guilty. You survived a situation when nobody else could, and you shouldn't have survived. We know statistic about drunk drivers. Drunk drivers who drive drunk statistically are the ones who do survive because their body is not as rigid when they crash, because they are, like, usually the one in the most controlled seat. The driver's seat is one of the most protected places in a car. Like, there are several things about that just make it interesting. And it's frustrating because they wanted to prey on weak emotion of survivor's guilt.
Right.
But didn't want to prey on the idea, not prey is the wrong word. They didn't want to accept the idea of, like, remorse in this movie. There was not a lot of remorse from anyone. And I think that's what they missed from everybody.
I agree. I guess the thing that I was, like, untangling as someone who, I mean, certainly is no expert in PTSD, is just, like, there's definitely I think, I'm saying definitely, and I'll put it to you, like, there is a sense that some people are more prone to it than others. And so what I was sort of wondering, I'm like, are you picking apart, like, are you less or more prone to PTSD if you were the instigator of the traumatic event? Like, and so that's where I was like, I'm not sure.
That's a psychological perception, depending on whether you think you're responsible, whether you are responsible. So there's, a lot of people take responsibility in PTSD, saying that they were responsible for the event when they weren't. But it can't be teased out from people who actually were responsible for the event too.
So that's kind of why I was bringing that up. Yeah. Like, they're not the same thing, but I was like, does you causing it, like, with that guilt and sense of, like, I got someone killed, like, make you more prone to.
But again, that's why I want to clarify.
I don't know.
PTSD just means you have to experience a traumatic event and have event flashbacks and frustration, denial, off-put of life, like things that are happening later about the event. All of them had definitely experienced a traumatic event.
For sure.
Not all of them had experienced survivor's guilt.
Right.
And did not... because survivor's guilt comes with a lot of remorse. Like, why did I survive? I could have done better. I could have done this. Versus, again, I don't think everybody in that movie felt that way, just from what we gathered. And, like, that's a huge distinction because you're basically trying to, as much as I love that it was about PTSD for the first time in a long time I've ever seen it not related to war, they weren't really trying to distinguish, like, hey, PTSD is something that people can live with and deal with and manage, but it does trigger flashbacks and it does trigger intense feelings and panic attacks and immobilizing behavior. We saw that, with the Iraqi war vet. She had burn scars from an IED explosion. And when fire starts going, she gets really concerned. But see, we don't get any of that backstory with, like, one of the characters who dies before we even know his backstory.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the point? Or the miner who's, like, crushed in a cave-in with his brother, and here's his brother hear his last breath. That is survivor's guilt. That is PTSD and survivor's guilt. Like, he shouldn't have... I took his oxygen instead of he could have taken mine. But there's 8 million things that could have happened with that guy's brother that he couldn't have controlled. And so this idea of survivor's guilt versus somebody who literally, in the movie, we see murder his friend to survive... And we can get into whether you would do that in this situation or not. It's a different day, different time, different story. Or a person who literally killed his friends because he was drunk driving. 2 people had control of their situations.
Right.
4 people did not.
Right. And I just think that kind of separates, I think, the PTSD question. But I'll tell you one story, like, holy crud, when I heard this story the first time, like, it was just like a punch to the gut because it was pretty soon after. I met a guy who was a Washington Post reporter, and he had the unenviable task after 9/11 of going to interview some of the family members. And he met parents who lost their daughter on the flight from California to Boston. And he was talking to them about it, and they were like, she had been begging us to visit. She was like, we're going to do this. We're going to have this trip to Boston. It's going to be amazing. And then we canceled at the last minute, and she went on her own. And the reporter was telling us, he was like, there was a pause, and the dad just said really quietly, we should have been on that plane. And it's like, that wouldn't have saved his daughter's life. He was literally like, we should have died with her. Like, and it was just like, oh, how must that feel when you're like, why am I here? You know, and it's like, it's real, and it's a really powerful emotion, and it's a really hard one to shake. And it, you know, and it really is just about surviving. Like, it's not about the, like, if I had done this, I could have saved this person. Like, It's like, I don't deserve to live when somebody else has passed. Like,
next example of survivor's guilt.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a really good point to your story is there's also vicarious trauma that was not addressed in this movie. Vicarious trauma is secondary trauma that happens to another person. These characters literally see people die in this movie.
Oh, totally. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up.
And there's there's a little bit of protest, and I mean a very little bit, like, oh my God, we saw someone die. You should be mad. There is not a single drop of human emotion in these deaths. And it bothered me so much. Like,
100%.
Human nature is not like that. I'm sorry if we see someone die right in front of us, and there are 3 exceptions to the rule. You could argue these exceptions, but statistically, war, prison, and prolonged disease is usually the last one. When you see somebody die in those conditions, like people who die continuously in a cancer clinic, or people who die continuously in, chronic disease clinics or stuff like that.
You mean you become like inert to it?
Yeah, you just become numb. War, prison, and disease clinics. And those are the only times you really see humans become desensitized to, like, death. And we didn't see that. Like, this is literally 5 strangers who have never met each other, and we actually know that strangers' death cause more empathy in the moment than they do from somebody you know. You cause more pain, but empathy actually comes more for a stranger, because you're like, that could have been me, versus you know the situation of the person you know in your life, so you can rationalize that it's not you. Not
only that, though, they don't allow us to process it either.
Nothing.
Like, as the audience, because the characters move on so quickly, there's not even a beat to be like,
somebody died.
Somebody just died, and like, you don't even give me a chance to think about it before you're on to the next thing, and you're like, wow, these people really, again, like red shirts, they were just disposable. Like,
well, and that's just it. It goes back to that whole conspiracy, though. Like, it's rich people watching, and we know this is not true. Like, people don't just watch people die for sport. Like, there was an analogy made to gladiators, and I was like, that's so far from what gladiators actually did. Gladiators fought for the honor of their country, the honor of their lord. Like, they did it. We'll say most gladiators who made it to the actual Colosseum did it willingly. Those who were in the outside rings and small farms may have been slaves who were made to fight. But, like, when you actually made it to the Colosseum to fight for the glory of Rome, you did it willingly, but you also had giant stakes to win. And that was kind of one of the contentions I was pissed about. The trailer said win $1 million. And, like, that's what the incentive was for these guys.
Yeah, it was like 100... Was it $1 million?
Yeah, it was $1 million in the trailer, and then it's $10,000 in the movie.
Yeah, I was like,
I would not go.
I remember it's $10,000, and yeah, and you're like, whoa. I mean, no. Like, I wouldn't risk my life for $1 million either, but
$10,000 doesn't sound like something... I mean, it didn't make much sense other for the nerdy people who just escape
powers, right?
Yeah, like 1 million bajillion dollars. No, like, it doesn't make much sense, because $10,000 is not going to make you, like, give up what you're doing and go, like, play a game. Like, it's for something you don't know, you've not researched, you don't know anything about. Like, it doesn't seem rational. But I just want to kind of, like, wrap up with the point of, like, the movie expressed PTSD and showed some good examples of it. The movie did a terrible job of expressing actual remorse, guilt, sadness,
care
empathy.
For human life at all.
And so it was kind of just like, Like, it kind you don't become numb to it, but you're just kind of like, oh, another person died. Shocker. Versus, like, even especially in the Saw movies, at least I felt every time somebody died, I was like, Jesus, it was either so gory, I felt like super, like, horrified, or it was like they at least told you enough about them that you cared. And this movie didn't give me that.
I got nothing.
Yeah.
The only reason I saw this movie is because it was rated PG-13.
I also don't know if
Preview, I'm not seeing, we will not be covering Us on the podcast because it's straight up horror from Jordan Peele and I'm out. Like, I don't watch horror. I get too scared.
But, like, it didn't look... I don't know that it actually should have been rated PG-13. There was some implied violence that I don't think is acceptable for probably kids who are 13. But I also think that I work with kids on a daily basis, and I don't think kids need to see violence, period. So, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so you're not going to hear it from me. Like, you know me.
Yeah.
Like, I think we, like, way overrate sex and way underrate violence when we think about these things. Like,
so I would rather have had more sex and less violence.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I would rather kids be exposed to, like, a loving relationship than I would have them, like, exposed to, like, a bunch of violence. So, yeah. All right, so wrapping it up on a social impact score from 1 to 10, I'm going to give this, like, a 2.
Oh, I was going to give it a healthy 3.5.
There you go.
I couldn't quite get to 4. I think the impact is first time we've seen PTSD really normalized within a group of people who are not in the military. And I'm sure people find corrections to my mistakes, but in my recent memory recall, that's what I can think of. And I think the other social impacts...
Rape, usually. That's the only other one that when you said that, that's the only one I can think of, like, they show people, like...
As a group, though?
Traumatized. No.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, that's the one most frequently, like, these are the two things that are so horrifying no one can imagine. Yeah.
But they were all really realistic PTSD. I mean, some of them weren't even that bad. Yeah.
And plenty of people were in car accidents.
That makes it sound insensitive. Some of them were not as severe as others. I think we gave the same score to, like, The Incredibles, so that makes me, like, kind of sad right now.
Yeah,
Don't see it in theaters. Literally stay at home with a nice bottle of wine and watch it. Watch it with somebody, though, because you want to talk about it after.
Yes. All right. So, recommendations?
Yeah, I have 3 really fast recommendations, everybody. So my first recommendation is a really great book on PTSD. I know you all are shocked right now. But it's on Amazon right now. I think it's like under $20. You can also get it on Audible if you have that. It says The Body Keeps Score, Brain, Mind, and the Body, The Healing of Trauma. And, oh my gosh, it's written by Bessel van der Kolk. He's an MD, which is kind of interesting. So I'm recommending something by a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. So if you know me, that's a big deal for me. A quirky one that I read in my master's program that I recommend to everybody I can. If you really want to know about, like, Freakonomics and stuff like that, I love a book called The Survivor's Club, The Secrets to Science That Could Save Your Life. It's by Ben Sherwood, and it literally tells you about how to survive scenarios like a plane crash, dying on a desert island, and it's a great fast read. And the third, because I am a huge nerd, and I think I've recommended this on the show before, but, like, adult coloring books, everybody. If you want to keep on your brain about, like, how to, like, stay on sharp to get in an escape room, how to de-stress, how to manage anxiety, depression, PTSD, adult coloring books are for you. Studies have proven 30 minutes a day, sitting there, you can listen to music, you can watch a movie, as long as you're focusing on the color, using at least 12 different colors. That is important. Spending 30 minutes a day improves your motor functions, improves your memory functions, improves your capacity for creative thinking as well.
Awesome. I'm going to make a PSA recommendation. I'm recommending sensitivity to your... If you know anybody who's on furlough, be they a government worker or a contractor and somebody who is actually working and not getting paid, be kind to your furloughed friends. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter. Take a second to leave a review, please, oh please. Recommend us to your friends. Check out our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. We've got links to all the things we've discussed. And we have a store if you want to buy a very cool Movies That Matter t-shirt. If you want to talk to us, leave a comment on our Facebook page. People have been burning up the comment sections of our website, actually, which I do respond to. So go for it. Let's have a dialogue. Keep it nice. And also check Twitter to find out what movie we're overanalyzing next. Every off Thursday of our posting we put out on Twitter. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.